Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Fernando Fernandez Feliciano. I'm a freshman at Florida International University, majoring in political science, and today I'm going to be talking about the upcoming 2020 Democratic primary. More specifically, my take on whom are the biggest contenders for the Democratic nomination. Now, ever since the 2018 midterm elections concluded a short while ago, speculation surrounding the upcoming 2020 Democratic primary has, unsurprisingly, heated up drastically, with big names exploring a run for the presidency and even surprising faces throwing their hat into the ring. The 2020 Democratic primary has the potential to be one of the most highly contested and unforgettable primaries in recent memory. Therefore, in light of the speculation, I've decided to give you all a rundown on the numerous potential candidates in which I will attempt to give you all an idea of whom I believe could clinch the Democratic nomination and ultimately go on to face President Trump in the general election. So with all of that being said, let's get to it.
We're going to talk about 2020 in a minute. Do you want to run again?
No.
Wait.
No.
That was a pause.
Well, I'd like to be president.
Okay.
Right off the bat, there's a bunch of potential candidates whom I'll dismiss out of hand. This includes Maryland Congressman John Delaney, Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti, Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper, Colorado Senator Michael Bennet, Oregon Senator Jeff Merkley, and former Secretary of Housing and Urban Development Julian Castro. Now, the problem with these potential candidates is that they lack three essential qualities needed to mount a successful campaign in a crowded field, which are A. Charisma, B. Name recognition, and C. An unambiguous set of policy proposals which make them stand out from the rest of the field, i.e. a strong and unique message. Now, if any given candidate intends to run a successful campaign in a field of, at the very least, 15 to 20 other candidates, it is imperative that they possess at least one of the three aforementioned qualities. For instance, back during the 2016 Democratic primary, Hillary Clinton, whom clearly lacked charisma and solely espoused standard Democratic talking points, cliches, and platitudes, enjoyed enormous name recognition, which instantaneously propelled her to frontrunner status. However, Senator Bernie Sanders, whom at the time enjoyed virtually no name recognition, benefited from a unique and unambiguous set of policy proposals which made him stand out from the rest of the field, and created a clear distinction between himself and the frontrunner, Hillary Clinton. Meanwhile, former Maryland Governor Martin O'Malley lacked all three of the aforementioned qualities, culminating in an abysmal showing. Likewise, these people are not charismatic. For the most part, they are burdened with an enormous lack of name recognition, and finally, they espouse standard Democratic talking points, cliches, and platitudes without offering any unique ideas which give Democratic voters a reason to vote for them. For instance, Congressman John Delaney, who's already announced that he's running for president, has spent virtually the entirety of his campaign talking about
bipartisanship.
However, notice that he never once specifies what exactly he wants to compromise on with the other side of the aisle. Meanwhile, Julian Castro, who's made it painfully obvious that he's going to run for president, has spent virtually the entirety of his recent media tour talking about
A new generation of leadership. They're looking for new faces.
Again, notice how he doesn't explain why exactly fresh leadership is important. Instead, he resorts to espousing standard Democratic talking points and emphasizing standard political cliches such as quote-unquote the need for fresh leadership. Well, I'm sorry to break it to you, Julian Castro, but in a field which is probably going to be packed with other fresh faces with more name recognition, which supplements standard Democratic talking points with actual unique policy proposals, parroting political cliches such as the need for fresh leadership and the importance of bipartisanship, is not really going to propel you to victory. And then there's Hillary Clinton, whom I can't believe is still relevant in the year 2018. Now, according to a former Clinton advisor, Hillary Clinton is actually considering a third run for the presidency. To put it plainly, she wouldn't stand a chance. The Democratic base is, among many things, looking for a candidate whom they feel can actually mount a credible challenge to President Trump. And the fact of the matter is that Hillary Clinton is quite simply not that person. Apart from the fact that she already lost to President Trump back in 2016, the Democratic base and the American electorate as a whole are just tired of her. After 2 failed presidential bids in the last decade alone, her approval rating has consistently remained in the dump. Her influence has diminished, and she's been overshadowed by other potential candidates. So suffices to say that Hillary Clinton, after being the main reason that President Trump won the 2016 US presidential election, would not make it far into the primary season. In fact, having said all of that, I would be incredibly surprised if either one of these candidates would survive past the Iowa caucus and, by the grace of some unforeseen miracle, go on to face President Trump in the general election.
What would be your approach to the president?
Now, I'm going to say I'm going to fight. I'm going to fight, but we're not going to be able to beat this guy by being nice.
The following batch of potential candidates is perhaps the most fascinating. Although not very likely to capture the Democratic nomination for President of the United States, they could influence the race and become forces to reckon with. For instance, let's talk about West Virginia State Senator Richard Ojeda. Unsurprisingly, most pundits in mainstream media have branded his campaign as a joke, because they obviously know what they're talking about, right? Now, let me be clear, I do agree with the consensus opinion. Richard Ojeda will not be the 2020 Democratic nominee for president. However, could he make a noticeable impact on the race? Yes, he indeed could, especially if he's able to participate in the debates. For starters, he projects a strong presence and isn't afraid to tell it like it is. And as we saw in the memorable exchange between Chris Christie and Marco Rubio back in 2016, such a candidate can easily decimate an opponent who simply espouses flowery rhetoric, cliches, and platitudes. For instance, let's take a moment to imagine the following scenario. Richard Ojeda is allowed to participate in the debates and almost immediately gets attacked by Cory Booker or Kamala Harris for his vote for President Trump during the 2016 general election. Now, a standard Democratic politician would immediately cave and play defense. However, Richard Ojeda is no standard Democratic politician. He would immediately go on the offense, shining a light on the skeletons in Booker's and Harris's closets, which could end up being detrimental to both senators' campaigns. Now again, do I believe Richard Ojeda will capture the Democratic nomination? No, I don't. His vote for President Trump during the 2016 general election could prove to be detrimental in a contest where Democratic voters are looking for a candidate who will represent the opposite of President Trump. However, his strong presence and populist rhetoric in a time where voters are sick and tired of the establishment could potentially propel his campaign to have a much bigger impact than most expect, just as it could propel the potential candidacy of Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard of Hawaii. Like Richard Ojeda, she projects a commanding presence, is in touch with the Democratic base's policy objectives, and isn't afraid to call out the establishment. However, despite those pluses, like in the case of Richard Ojeda, it is not my belief that she would capture the Democratic nomination for President of the United States. From the look of things, numerous potential candidates with higher name recognition are gearing up to run equally progressive campaigns, making it probable that she would be overshadowed by them. However, like Richard Ojeda, she could potentially thrive in the current political climate. Then there's the billionaires, Tom Steyer and Michael Bloomberg. Now, ever since Donald Trump was elected President of the United States, many Democratic Party insiders have debated whether they should prop up a billionaire of their own, with the impeachment guys Tom Steyer and the portion cap guy, Michael Bloomberg, so far being the only two billionaires who have openly expressed their interest in vying for the 2020 Democratic nomination for president. However, the fact of the matter is that as things currently stand inside of the Democratic Party, these candidates don't stand a chance. The sole reason they're even a part of the conversation is because A, there are enormous piles of cash, and B, the mainstream media's constant legitimization of their potential campaigns. However, in a time where the Democratic Party is shifting in a populist left direction, it is my belief that such people's potential campaigns would quickly sink to irrelevancy, especially in a crowded field where many contenders will be competing for who is the most progressive and least beholden to corporate special interests. And by the way, don't get me wrong, I'm obviously aware that money continues to be of great importance in politics. However, in today's political climate, the source of the money and the rhetoric that accompanies it matters more than the money itself. That is one of the reasons that Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders and President Donald Trump, whom espoused populist rhetoric, performed so exceptionally well in the past election, while candidates such as Jeb Bush, who raised and spent over $130 million while espousing standard status quo talking points, lost in such an embarrassing manner. Having said that though, their enormous wealth, if spent attacking specific candidates, could drastically alter the race and decimate the reputation of many potential candidates. And finally, there's the senators. More specifically, the senators whom, while potentially formidable candidates, don't stand a chance to capture the nomination but could influence the race in a significant manner. This includes Senators Sherrod Brown of Ohio, Cory Booker of New Jersey, Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota, Kristen Gillibrand of New York, and Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts. Now, four of those five aforementioned senators, Sherrod Brown, Elizabeth Warren, Kristen Gillibrand, and Amy Klobuchar, were resoundingly re-elected during this year's midterm elections, which automatically gives them the ability to argue that they adequately represent their constituents. However, Sherrod Brown and Amy Klobuchar can go even further by arguing that they won re-election resoundingly in the Midwestern states of Ohio and Minnesota, which will be critical to Democratic hopes of retaking the White House in 2020. On the other hand, Kristen Gillibrand easily won re-election in the overwhelmingly Democratic state of New York, which doesn't really matter all that much when it comes to the general election. Additionally, while she could boast about her recent votes, which admittedly are pretty progressive, other progressive candidates could bring up damning facts, such as her more centrist past, questionable past donations, and opportunistic tendencies. Therefore, I really don't see her coming close to capturing the Democratic nomination, just as I don't see Sherrod Brown or Amy Klobuchar capturing it either. While they could carry their respective home states, Ohio and Minnesota, taking a number of critical delegates away from other progressive candidates in the process, it is my belief that they would fail to attract additional support beyond their statewide boundaries. Additionally, I don't see either Senator Cory Booker nor Senator Elizabeth Warren coming close to capturing the nomination either, which may come as a surprise to some given the fact that they have been treated as serious contenders by both the mainstream media and even independent media. However, they both face one gigantic hurdle: the fact that they absolutely, unequivocally suck at campaigning. Let's start with New Jersey Senator Cory Booker. Now, just like Kristen Gillibrand, as of late, Cory Booker has steadily pivoted to the left. However, just like Kristen Gillibrand as well, that is a very recent development. Likewise, other progressive candidates could bring up damning facts, such as his more centrist past, questionable past donations, questionable votes, questionable connections, etc. Furthermore, Cory Booker is just horrible at campaigning. Sure, he may be relatively charismatic, but his pivot to the left seems incredibly disingenuous, especially with some of his questionable remarks. His constant grandstanding at Senate hearings and interviews is incredibly unbearable, and his milquetoast flowery rhetoric is absolutely nauseating. In a time where Democratic voters are looking for strength and authenticity, I can confidently affirm, more than a year away from the first in the nation Iowa caucus, that Cory Booker will not become the Democratic nominee for President of the United States. Likewise, Elizabeth Warren will not become the Democratic nominee for president either. Although in touch with the Democratic base policy-wise, she, like Cory Booker, is painfully awful at campaigning. Regardless of your personal opinion regarding the DNA test fiasco, the fact of the matter is that it was an unmitigated PR disaster, becoming an instant meme in a matter of hours. Couple that with the countless additional public blunders, a cringeworthy overall vibe, and worst of all, public polling showing that she is underperforming in her home state of Massachusetts, and one quickly comes to the realization that Elizabeth Warren will almost certainly not become the 2020 Democratic nominee for President of the United States. However, having said that, both potential candidates could potentially impact the race, with Cory Booker potentially taking votes and or delegates away from potential candidates in key southern states, and Elizabeth Warren potentially taking votes and or delegates away from other potential progressive candidates. The final group of potential candidates is perhaps the most relevant. Hear me now, quote me later, one of the following four individuals will be the 2020 Democratic nominee for President of the United States, and potentially the 46th President of the United States, with those individuals being Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders, former Vice President Joe Biden, California Senator Kamala Harris, and Texas Congressman Beto O'Rourke. Let's begin by talking about the Democratic Party's latest rising star, Beto O'Rourke. Now, ever since Beto O'Rourke lost to incumbent Republican Senator and failed presidential candidate Ted Cruz by a mere 2.6 percentage points in the Republican stronghold of Texas, which drastically boosted his already high name recognition, his name has been consistently floated as a potential candidate for the 2020 Democratic primary. In fact, there was even a recently conducted poll which showed Beto O'Rourke being the first choice of Democratic voters to be the 2020 Democratic nominee for President of the United States. And for good reason. He's young, he's charismatic, he comes across as sincere, he's a hard worker, he helmed a gigantic fundraising machine of small dollar donors, he almost won in deep red Texas, and he espouses a relatively progressive message which appeals to the Democratic base. It truly seems like a no-brainer, right? Well, look, without a doubt, Beto O'Rourke does indeed have a bright future ahead of him. However, he does indeed possess a weakness that not many people talk about very much: weakness itself. For instance, let's take a look at a quick, memorable exchange between Beto O'Rourke and Ted Cruz during one of their debates.
This is what you can expect over the course of this debate. Senator Cruz is not going to be honest with you. He's going to make up positions and votes that I've never held or have ever taken. He's dishonest. It's why the president called him Lying Ted, and it's why the nickname stuck, because it's true.
Now, at first glance, Beto's attack comes across as strong, truthful, and above all, straight to the point. That was indeed the case until he, for some unknown reason, decided to ruin it by saying that it made him feel uncomfortable, and by basically indirectly apologizing to Ted Cruz. And to be completely honest, in a packed primary that will be filled with potential candidates who are yearning for the title of President of the United States, that sort of weakness could be potentially devastating. If Beto O'Rourke does indeed plan to run for President of the United States, he has to be prepared to face unprecedented levels of political attacks and public scrutiny. And to cope with those attacks, he has to be prepared to aggressively push back by not being afraid to go on the offensive. With that being said though, Beto O'Rourke, with the exception of a few fundamental flaws, including a more centrist neoliberal past which could potentially be used against him, pretty much has what it takes to capture the Democratic nomination. He has the momentum, he has the charisma, he has the name recognition, he's young in a time where Democratic voters are looking for a fresh face, he takes no corporate PAC money, and above all, he possesses the will to work hard to earn every single vote he needs to emerge victorious, as demonstrated by the fact that he visited all of Texas' 254 counties during the recently held Senate election in the state. Couple all of those facts with the fact that the state of Texas, which possesses an enormous amount of delegates, will be up for the taking on Super Tuesday, the most important date in the entire primary season, and the path for Beto O'Rourke starts to become even more clear. Therefore, I wouldn't be surprised at all if Beto O'Rourke triumphs and or becomes a pivotal party leader for the years to come. And with him out of the way, let's talk about the Democratic Party's other rising star, Kamala Harris. While at this point in time, national polling doesn't show that much support for her, which to be completely honest is irrelevant 1 year out from the primary, she does have quite a few things going for her. Like Beto O'Rourke, she's young, she's an African American woman in a party which is becoming increasingly diverse, and above all, she espouses a pretty progressive message which appeals to the increasingly progressive Democratic base. However, the biggest potential advantage for her potential campaign is, like in the case of the state of Texas, with respect to Beto O'Rourke's potential candidacy, the fact that the state of California, which possesses an enormous amount of delegates, even more than Texas, will be up for the taking on Super Tuesday, which, like I said, is the most important date in the entire primary season. In other words, she could potentially lose the states of Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, and South Carolina, and still become the frontrunner as a result of a resounding victory in her home state of California, which would boost her potential campaign's momentum enormously. Additionally, if she plays her cards right, she could virtually sweep the South, especially if the former Vice President Joe Biden decides not to run and New Jersey Senator Cory Booker is taken out of the picture early. However, even though her path to the nomination is solid, Kamala Harris is not without potential flaws. Her failure to prosecute Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin for his obvious crimes and his subsequent $2 million donation to her campaign could potentially be used against her to severely damage her reputation among the Democratic base. Additionally, while not an outright flaw, she could easily get overshadowed in a primary which could potentially feature a former vice president, the most popular politician in the country, Billionaires, and the latest rising star with the most momentum, Beto O'Rourke. However, despite those possible obstacles, I wouldn't discount her chances just yet. Definitely keep an eye on her, and now, with both Beto O'Rourke and Kamala Harris out of the way, let's talk about the two potential candidates who have consistently led on all recent polling: former Vice President Joe Biden and Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders. Now, as of this moment in time, the fact of the matter is that both Vice President Joe Biden and Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders are the frontrunners, which in all honesty is not surprising in the slightest. Both potential candidates enjoy strong approval ratings, have an already established solid base of support, and boast enormous name recognition. Additionally, both potential candidates are excellent debaters and superb campaigners. However, the question remains, will Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders actually run? Now, let me be clear, as of the recording of this video, all signs seem to be pointing towards a run by both potential candidates. However, it is my belief that the answer to that question is not as clear as one might initially think. For starters, both candidates face a gigantic hurdle: their age. Now, let me be clear. In my mind, age should not be an issue when evaluating potential candidates. In my mind, policy outweighs both age and identity, and I absolutely despise decisions made on the basis of either. However, this discussion is not about my personal political beliefs/opinions. The discussion is about which potential candidates could capture the Democratic nomination based on my observations of A, the trends inside of the Democratic Party, B, the data currently available, and C, the current political climate. The fact of the matter is that age has become a serious matter for many Democratic voters, whom yearn for fresh faces and quote-unquote new blood inside of the party. And the fact that Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders will be 78 and 79 years old respectively during the time of the next presidential inauguration further exacerbates their concerns. Therefore, with that being said, there is a very real possibility that neither potential candidate runs and instead chooses to endorse a younger candidate who adequately represents their policy objectives and beliefs. However, like I said, as of the recording of this video, it seems likely that both Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders will run once again. And if that's the case, without question, one of them will be the 2020 Democratic nominee for President of the United States. Now, with all of that being said, whom do I think will ultimately capture the nomination? Well, it all depends on the makeup of the field. If Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders decide to step into the field, one of them without a doubt will become the Democratic nominee, with Beto O'Rourke, if he ultimately decides to run in this scenario, coming in a close third. However, if both Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders decide to not step into the field, the nominee will be either Beto O'Rourke or Kamala Harris. And finally, if neither Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, or Beto O'Rourke decide to step in the field, Kamala Harris will be the 2020 Democratic nominee for President of the United States. Having said that, the question remains, can any of these potential candidates beat President Trump in the general election? Well, that's a question I'll answer in my next video.